Aloha, this is me, MarkO, talking, and I welcome you to Dances with Dragons, a Green Heart Foundation podcast. In this podcast, you will hear about my real-life stories and adventures, together with the exciting current projects of our Green Heart Foundation. So, sit back, relax, and get ready to listen. As our story continues, as you recall, I was in Sri Lanka. I had arrived there and been shown hospitality more than I'd ever received any time in my life by this wonderful family of Colonel B.B. Pereira, the colonel in the Sri Lankan military. And they were now proposing to me that I propose to a lovely Sri Lankan lady that happens to be involved with jewelry mines and jewelry business, gemstones in particular. Sri Lanka, as I mentioned, is a center in the world for sapphires, star sapphires, and one stone not considered precious, but to me became an incredibly important stone for my jewelry business, was the Sri Lankan moonstone. And so I'm with Uncle Bernie and I'm with the family, and they decided that they're going to start to introduce me to some families that had daughters available for marriage. And the bottom line was they were hoping that I would take their lovely daughter after betrothed together. That's not a word, but it is now. As I was betrothed with her, I would get her, of course, a fiancé visa or a marriage visa to bring her to the USA, and she would open a bank account and have money beginning to come through the family into the United States. And that was a very important aspect to a lot of wealthy people, still is today around the world. How do they move money? A lot of governments and countries limit movement of money, especially US dollars. So here we are on different transports, family cars, taking uncle's truck filled up in the back with people and coolers full of food. And we would take off into the hills and drive to different beautiful tourist sites that weren't really having many tourists, but the spiritual destinations were a particular interest to me. And so I was getting the tour of Sri Lanka as we were going around visiting different families of the Pereira family that had potential wives for me to consider. And I was very apprehensive, of course. At this point, I'm 22 years old, 23 years old, and marriage was not the first thing on my mind, especially as I was embarking on this journey to the east and on my mission to find the first land of the dragon called Bhutan, land of thunder dragon. So I remember going to my first real classic Buddhist temple in a town called Kandy, spelled with a K, and it was up in the mountains, and it had a Buddhist temple that was said to house one of the original teeth of Lord Buddha. So it seems when Lord Buddha had passed away around 500 BC, he had different parts of his robes, different parts of his body, hair, you name it, that were scattered around the Buddhist world. And this temple in Kandy, Sri Lanka, had what was said to be one of the original Buddha teeth. And I was beginning to realize Buddhism was something so cool. I'd only studied it in school, back at University Irvine with Professor George Kent in particular, my Chinese philosophy professor. I had heard about Buddhism, meeting Bouncing Benny in the streets of old Stockholm on his blanket, selling incredible, elaborate Buddhist iconography posters of different Buddhist kings and lords and incarnations and deities surrounding Buddhism. And I'm being drawn in, especially because now I'm actually in one of my first, actually, it was the first temple that I really recall visiting when I left Europe, all the way through Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan, all Muslim. Then I got to India, primarily Hindu and Muslim. Sri Lanka was a Buddhist nation, recognized as the official religion. Very few countries in the world have that. Thailand is one, as is Bhutan. They're Buddhist, and of course Tibet. But Tibet not recognized, sadly, as a nation. And hopefully Tibet gets free one day. So I am fascinated with Buddhism. I'm nervous about a family that I'm going to meet that particular evening. And lo and behold, we walk into a family party, and there was feasting. People were dressed up so fancy, and it was to welcome Uncle Bernie and his buddy from the USA, MarkO, to a party that was intended to introduce a lovely young lady or two. The second time, actually, there were two sisters I was introduced to. And I'm nervous. And I had had some lovely experiences with love and dating in Europe, and of course, briefly in the USA while I was in high school, finishing high school and college. But now I'm being introduced to someone that could be marriage material, a possible fiance. It was all happening so quickly, I couldn't even blink fast enough to wake myself up and slap myself to say, am I really wanting to do this? And I don't want to hurt the feelings of these families, but they sure seem eager. And then I began to learn that, of course, the family, like the Pereira family introducing me to the family I may mention, marry into. So the family that I might marry into was also offering a commission, like a finder's fee, for whoever brought the potential groom to their beautiful daughter. So this particular night was lots of drinking, alcoholic beverages, music, people dressed up so fancy, food like I fell in love with Sri Lankan curry. All of you, I'm sure, at some point in your lives have had some Indian food from an Indian restaurant wherever in the world. Sri Lankan takes Indian food to another level, and it's because of one ingredient they add: coconut milk. And they do these curries with coconut milk, spicy, like hot, 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 and such a different variety of curry than what I had experienced rushing through India on trains day after night after day. And everything's fun, everything's fine. People are getting very high and drunk. And I'm all of a sudden introduced to this lovely lady who walks out wearing a sari, a typical Indian type of sari. Her hair down beyond her bottom, her okole, her butt, long black hair, gorgeous, darker complected than a lot of the Indians that I had seen, and also darker complected. The Sri Lankans seem to have some of the African blood, since you look where Sri Lanka is, and if you go due west across the Indian Ocean, you're going to hit Madagascar and Africa. I thought black was beautiful. I learned this in my black culture class with Lou Smith, the most impressionable man, teacher, mentor I've had in my academic career. Black is beautiful, and we used to put our fist in the air even though we were white honkies. I began to learn that black is beautiful. So I'm looking at one of the most beautiful women I've ever seen in my life. It was very formal. We weren't able to even get alone together. There were people beside us, always monitoring, helping her feel comfortable. She was probably 10 times more nervous than I was, meeting this big, tall, hairy, red-headed, curly-headed, somewhat hippie looking from the length of my hair. And I was being courting this lovely lady, found myself courting this lovely lady, and I realized I'm asked to propose soon, get an engagement party, and marry her, and that was the order that I was told. It turns out, as the evening's progressing and everyone's getting a little looser lipped with their drinking, this was like an engagement party. This was literally, they were taking this seriously. Like I wasn't just a suitor. I was someone that the family cleared, the Pereira family cleared. This is our perfect candidate for your lovely daughter. And let's proceed with an engagement and talk logistics and where would I like to live. So I am very, very eager to start jewelry business with some new stones, some new semi-precious and even a few precious stones, to start finding a designer, which I was told the best place could be Nepal, although they were telling me they have jewelers, of course, in a country like Sri Lanka, making some of the most beautiful stones into necklaces and bracelets and rings. So they were convincing me I don't need the Himalayas. Everything I want in life for business, starting a family, and lifestyle is right there in Sri Lanka. And it was way too fast for me. And I recall the feeling when I finally found myself in a bed in a hotel nearby with many of the other family, including Uncle Bernie, that this was getting way too serious, way too quickly. And they're asking me already, will I be able to provide a home in the USA? Well, I'm 22, 23 years old. I had saved $800 to start a trip throughout Asia and the Middle East and Central Asia. I certainly have always stayed with my parents, if not my $75 a month apartment I rented while I was going to University of California. No, I wasn't having plans to buy a house in the USA. So I realized how serious this was becoming. They wanted to know that I was going to be financially secure, coming from a good family, very important. They asked about my parents and extended family. And so here I am realizing I don't think I'm ready for this. And Uncle Bernie, because he had been living in Canada and was much more Western-minded and open-minded, was, of course, realizing this. But for him, he must have been getting some kind of a commission because he was pushing it. He said, you can travel, you know, you can be in all these different countries in Europe and Western cultures and Asia. You can't marry a better culture, Sri Lankan, Buddhist. You've already told us you love Buddhism. And so I continued for the next couple weeks traveling with them. There was one other family they had back in Colombo they wanted to introduce me to, but everyone felt, why do I need a second choice? This is the lady I'm to marry. And lo and behold, I started collecting more of the stones. I was, of course, always running low on money. And here I find that because I had original authentic Persian turquoise and authentic Afghanistan lapis lazuli, that when I started showing some of my stone collection to these families and jewelers and looking at moonstones, and they wanted some of my stones. And so here I am, I bartered away my blue jeans and overalls and tennis shoes and socks and belts to get all these stones. And now I'm bartering with the very stones I bartered for, bartering to get moonstones, bartering to get sapphires. Even I was touching into some low-grade rubies. Ruby is a very expensive, considered priceless stone, but there are all calibers and qualities of stone, precious and semi-precious. So I accumulated a very nice stash of stones. We ended up back in Sri Lanka, and I had spent a couple months of different travels around with the family, seeing Buddhist temples. I'm realizing it's time to go. And more than ever, I felt I could get trapped here. I may never see the Himalayas the way they're talking. I will be changing diapers possibly in another 10, 12 months. Better start to pack my faithful backpack and my bag, my Afghani double carpet bag, and hit the road again. And so I was delaying and deferring, and they understood that. And I basically was saying, well, before I could ever consider this, I've got to get back to Hawaii and talk to my parents, of course. And I can bring up all the concerns of this family and where we'd live, and will I have support and blessings from my family? Very important when you marry into more traditional cultures. And that bought me some breathing room, saying, well, once I get my business going, start actually designing some of these rings, bracelets, jewelry, stones into jewelry, that's when I can go back to the West and start to make a business, start to market, find buyers for my jewelry. So I bought some time. I was a very emotional farewell. I was taken again to the same station where I retraced my steps, going from Sri Lanka's capital, Colombo, up to overnight train up to the north tip of Sri Lanka, where I would catch the night ferry, taking me over to India side, southeast India, and from there, hello, welcome to the Indian trains again. And this time I'm going from the south of India to the northeast tip and then to cross into the Himalayas. So I'm literally going from the south tropics of Sri Lanka and India, which is below the equator, all the way to the Himalayan mountains. And I thought I traveled fast leaving Kabul, Afghanistan, when I had met Rohan and his cousin, to go down to Sri Lanka to get warm, to get coconuts, and to meet this incredible family. I traveled fast. I beelined. I did not ever stay in a hotel room or a bed. I was on that train for virtually 5 days and nights. And I did the same. I did it in 5 days and 5 nights. And I don't remember that trip. I was just fearing that I don't know if I can go back to Sri Lanka. As much as I love it, I have jewelry contacts there. I felt like I was escaping, a prisoner that was escaping, finding his freedom. The bag boy MarkO gets free from a marriage proposal and being literally coerced into matrimony. And so, lo and behold, I'm on the border of southeast, almost south central Nepal, and I had no idea. I just thought, well, I'll get another train to get up into Kathmandu, which is out in the valley in central Nepal. It's a good joke if you ever want to play with people when you're in Nepal. Tell them, oh, hey, why don't we meet? We can talk about that. Let's go have a tea. Meet at the train station. There are no trains in the Himalayas. There's no trains in Bhutan. And it was funny because decades later, I end up in Laos. And again, Laos is a country without trains. Until recently, the Chinese have just completed a railroad from North Laos and the border of China all the way through Laos into Thailand. and part of their one belt, one road, one belt concept of controlling the world and all the trade routes. But that's China, and that's another story, because I'm now entering the Himalayas, which had huge influence from China to the north, the communist neighbor, and India to the south. So you had the biggest communist population bordering Nepal, and of course Sikkim, the neighbor country, and Bhutan, the other neighbor kingdom, and India, the world's largest democracy, to the south. So I was ready to start learning about the cultures, learning about Buddhism, learning about how I can build a jewelry business. And of course, everywhere I'm going, I'm always looking in shops when I see a beautiful piece of cloth.
Thank you for listening to Dances with Dragons. I hope you all enjoyed my stories of the adventures of a modern-day MarkO Polo. Join us next week to listen to more exciting real-life stories. If you enjoyed our podcast, please leave us a review and share it with others. To learn more about us, please visit our website at greenheartfoundation.org and follow our social media accounts. See you next week.